and welcome back to our series, Standing Strong in a Wicked World. It's a study of the book of Daniel. And last week we talked about Daniel speaking with Belshazzar in the final moments of Babylon. Yeah, they were taken captive, Daniel and all his friends, the exiles from Judah, were taken captive by King Nebuchadnezzar and brought to Babylon. And then after Babylon passed, there was another king that was put in place, and he was Belshazzar, and he saw writing on the wall. He was a very arrogant king. In fact, a king that actually used the utensils from the temple that they had stolen from Jerusalem and used them for a big drunken party. And that was the end of him. That was the final night. There's actually a date attached to it, October 12th, 509 BC. Historians believe that that's when Babylon ended. That's when the Medo-Persians killed Belshazzar and took over Babylon. So no more Babylon. Now we're going to hear a lot about the Medo-Persians in this next chapter. And this next chapter is the famous chapter, Daniel chapter 6, Daniel and the Lion's Den. So we're going to talk about that story. And you'll hear this term Medo-Persians, or the Persians and Media. And this is two combined kingdoms that were enemies, but they came together, and now they are the ones that defeated Babylon and have kind of created a law to keep each other in check. And you'll hear that known as the laws of the Persians and Medes, or the laws of the Medes and Persians. Esther talks about that throughout the book. But here we are about to experience life in the new kingdom, the Medo-Persian kingdom in Babylon. Now Babylon is gone. In fact, Isaiah 21:9 prophesied about it. It said, Babylon has fallen. All the images of her gods have been made shattered to the ground. And so here we go. Now Daniel is still in the kingdom, and he still has a place of power and prominence because he's gifted and they know it. And so let's just get back into this. But I want to say this before we get into Daniel and the Lion's Den. This is one of the most beloved stories for children, for Sunday school classes, for children's, instruction, Bible stories, little Bible books, and along with some other great stories that we tell our kids right from the Old Testament, right from the Hebrew Scriptures. David and Goliath, Jonah, Samson, Noah's Ark, they're all depicted like in Sunday school plays, cute little coloring books, even toys and games based on these true accounts from the Old Testament. And it's very interesting, however, that as fun as these stories are for kids to read or sing about or color pictures of, they're among the most tragic and horrific occurrences that take place in the entire Bible. And it's sort of funny how we sanitize these stories for our children, kind of to protect them from the gruesome realities of each of these incidents. Just think about these. I'll go through a few of them. David and Goliath, cute little story. But David killed Goliath by slinging a stone into his forehead and then went over and chopped off his head with a sword. And then Jonah, swallowed by a great fish. Well, he spent 3 days immersed in fish guts before he was vomited out to dry land. And then he is suicidal at the end of the chapter. Samson and Delilah. Well, Samson was a murderous womanizer. I mean, he killed people, he womanized. And then he met his match. He was seduced by a seductress, Delilah, who sold him to the Philistines after tricking him into cutting off his hair, which was the source of strength, gouge out his eyes. And then in response, he killed himself along with 3,000 Philistines. That was his ending. How about the most devastating story in the entire Bible? Noah and the ark. Noah's ark is when mankind became so evil all the time that in Genesis 6:6, it says that God regretted that he even made man. So in response, he destroyed all the living creatures on the entire earth, men, women, animals alike, except for Noah and his family. It's the highest death toll of any event in the entire Bible, maybe any event in history, and it's the most wonderful story for children's bedtime stories and coloring books. And now we get to where we're at now. We're in the book of Daniel. And we already saw the fiery furnace, and now we're about to see the lion's den. And these were when these people were taken captive from Judah, brought to modern-day Iran, Iraq, brought to Babylon. And this is the fiery furnace, the lion's den. This is how captives are executed. I know. I don't mean to be so dour, but at the time of the lion's den, this takes place, Daniel was not a kid in the lion's den. He was an 80-something-year-old man. And death by lions was just one of many cruel execution techniques that these kingdoms would bring about. They would throw someone in to be fully devoured alive by starved animals. So these accounts are not for the faint of heart. And they show how wicked the world was that Daniel stood strong in. And that's why we call the series Standing Strong in a Wicked World. So let's get into it. Daniel chapter 6, the story of the lion's den. Starting with chapter 6, verse 1. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel was so distinguished among the administrators and satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. All right, so Daniel, we saw all through this book, he's got these extraordinary gifts: leadership, dream interpretation. He's very godly. In fact, the Bible says that he had an extraordinary spirit. In other words, evidence of God's presence was all over his life, and it was clear for others to see. Now, he found himself in positions of authority, and here he is, one of the 3 people that ruled the whole kingdom. He is being groomed by the king to rule over the whole kingdom, and always finds himself in raising to the top in positions of authority, but he's got enemies here, jealous enemies. Now again, this is the Medo-Persian kingdom, the one that succeeded the Babylonian kingdom, and now he is here for a 3rd time. He's being raised up as a ruler, but people were very jealous of him. They wanted to find some kind of corruption to exploit, some type of fault that he had, but he was so trustworthy, and he had no corrupt nor negligent behavior. You know, this is much like Jesus at the end of his life. When he was arrested, it wasn't by the Romans, it was by the Jews and the temple guard. And they brought him to the house of the high priest, Caiaphas and Annas. And they're trying to find things that they could pin on him, things according to their law. In Matthew 29, 59 and 60 says, the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so they could put him to death, but they did not find any, though many false witnesses came forward. They're very similar to Daniel. They're trying to find some fault with him. All right, let's move on. Daniel 6, second half of verse 4. They could find no corruption in him, because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the laws of his God. So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, may King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. All right, so Daniel's enemies went to the king to change the laws of the land and put them in direct opposition to God's laws. Daniel showed from chapter 1 that he's going to honor God in this foreign land, eating kosher, only worshiping God, not worshiping false idols, and right here praying, as he always did, praying to God. And the law was placed right in direct opposition to what Daniel, how he lived his life in accordance to God's laws. Because they said, anyone who prays to any god, human or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, will be thrown into the lion's den. See, they knew they could get him if they put not his conduct, not his abilities on trial, but his devotion to God, and put that at odds with his devotion to the king and the laws of the land. So they would force him to have to choose, either honor God or honor king, disobey God or disobey the laws of the land. And that would get him prosecuted for not being fully loyal to the king. And that was the choice he had to make. And you know what? When we study this, standing strong in the wicked world, keep in mind that you and I are often put in a place where we have to choose to honor God or honor the cultural dictates of society, and maybe sometimes even the law of the land. So keep that in mind. That's why we're studying this. All right, so they made sure that the king put the new law in writing, made it official so that it could not be altered. And it was written, quote unquote, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So this was an ordinance agreed upon. These two kingdoms come together and they said, if we put a decree in writing and call it the law of the Medes and Persians, then neither your kingdom nor our kingdom can repeal it, or we all have to abide by it. And that was really important to them, that these things were held unchangeable, and they had to abide by it. So Daniel 6, now we're in verse 10. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. But this is key. Daniel's reaction shows us not only his integrity and devotion to God, but his trust and faith in God. In the midst of this terrifying crisis, he knew what was at stake, but he remained a faithful man of prayer. He got down on his knees and he gave thanks. I mean, you would think there would be nothing to be thankful for at that moment, but he got down on his knees and he gave thanks, just as he had done before all this took place. How about that? And this was obviously not new for Daniel. This is how he lived his life. It was regular devotion to God, giving thanks even in very tough circumstances, knowing that in these times he needed to pray to God. That he had no choice. He needed to pray to God, even though doing that was the very thing that was in direct violation to the decree. Right? So at the time where he was told he can't pray to God or he'd be thrown into a lion's den, he knew the very thing he needed to do was to pray to God. And that's exactly what he did. And as soon as he had heard about the decree, what did he do? He went home. He didn't try to escape. He purposely disobeyed it, not because he's trying to rebel, not because he was trying to be insubordinate, but because he knew God came first in his life. He trusted God more than he trusted the law of the land or his own self-preservation. He trusted God. And he wouldn't let anything come before his relationship with God. And also, he didn't go home to complain to God. He didn't go home to just he didn't go to the king, who he knew, obviously he was well trusted. He didn't go to the king and try to convince him to change the law or to do something different, and or just even expose it. Hey, king, this is part of a diabolical plan against me that these guys put in place. No, he humbly knelt and he gave thanks and he prayed to God. That's what he did. Remember, Daniel is in his early 80s now. And at this stage, he has a lifetime of experiencing God's hand moving, God's wisdom teaching him, God's miracles before him. So he knew, not just by faith, which is obviously how he lived, but by God's providential hand being faithful through his whole life, that he could trust God. He can trust God. And because of that, he's not freaked out, right? He's not shaken. He's got a firm foundation. He's able to stand strong in this wicked world, which is what our series is. All right, so let's get into it, starting with verse 11. These men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human except for you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. And then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. And when the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. And then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king has issued can be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel, and they threw him into the lion's den. And the king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so the king's situation might not be changed. And then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating, without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. Wow. All right, so here you have it. It rolls out. Daniel was caught red-handed. And although the king now realized that he had just been tricked, there was nothing he could do about it. He tried. He tried to save Daniel, but there was nothing he could do about it because these decrees were non-negotiable, and he was forced to act upon it. And so even though the king is sorrowful, he realized he had to do this, that the law of the Medes and Persians was something that he himself was forced to obey, and it must be upheld. So here he is, has to do what he had done. Now, Darius is an interesting king. He's complicated, much like Nebuchadnezzar. You're not sure if you're supposed to hate him or like him. He's ruthless, he's cruel, he puts people to death on one hand, but the other thing is he shows faith in God. Very exemplary faith in God. He spent the night fasting in sorrow with concern for Daniel, and he was convinced that Daniel's God could save him. He had enough faith to say, you know what? That God of Daniel's, he could save him. He was anxiously awake all night long, wondering if that was actually going to take place. In fact, when he went there the next day, that was in his mind, that this is a possibility. He fasted all night. As someone said, he fasted all night, hoping the lions would do likewise. So here it is. Morning comes. Let's go to verse 19. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. And when he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions?" And Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I done any wrong before you, your majesty." Oh, the king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Wow. Wicked world. Wicked world. That's how it was. And just like in Babylon, there was total execution. People, families. And this was prevalent here in Babylon, or now it's in the Medo-Persian Empire, as it was in other parts of the ancient world. But Daniel was placed there on a mission. He was there on a mission. And his testimony and the hand of God working miraculously on his behalf changed the heart of the king, who in turn changed the laws of the land, changed the laws of the kingdom. A new decree was put forth that favored the God of Daniel and praised him as the living God who endures forever. Let's see. Right there in verse 25, it says, Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in the whole earth, "May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel." And then here at the second half of verse 26, throughout the rest of the chapter, just a few verses, he writes a poem, a psalm really. Here's what it says: "For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." And then verse 28, "So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian." He comes next. So Daniel, he's one of the many examples of faithful men and women of God who trusted God, who trusted him in dire circumstances, trusting him as they faced incredibly challenging times, faced peril, faced danger, faced death straight in the face, and they trusted God to rescue them. Trusted God for rescue, for provision, for protection, for deliverance, for miracles, to save them from some of the most incredible circumstances that any of us can even imagine. And in every instance, God shows his power, shows his strength against any earthly enemy. In some cases, the laws of science and nature itself, like fire, like lions. God prevails. God never fails. The Bible talks about these experiences and gives them to us, not just to entertain them. Wow, it's a cool action story. Not just to tease us, say, well, that's how God worked then, but he doesn't work that way now. No. God's same strength, same power is at work with us today in our lives. Look around. He rescues us. He protects us. He delivers us from enemies all around us. Some are natural and physical. Some are entirely spiritual. And at every turn we take, we are stepping into spiritual warfare. And we don't fully know the amount of protection and rescue and deliverance and salvation that God is giving us and providing for us every second of the day in the spiritual warfare that's all around us. But it even counts on the physical and natural side as well. I think of the end of Paul's life when he's talking to Timothy, writing 2 Timothy, and he's recounting some of the trials and struggles that he has. Now, bear in mind, this is one of the last things Paul ever wrote. He was put to death soon after this. But he's telling Timothy about all these things and very real enemies that he had, some that deserted him, some that actually just went about trying to do him harm. And he compares it to being delivered from the lion's mouth and tells how the Lord stood by his side. Alexander the coppersmith was someone who, when he shows up in Scripture, in Paul's writings, it's always as Paul's enemy, someone that just goes around trying to do Paul harm. Do you have anybody like that in your life? I know I've had a few. Well, let's just read it. 2 Timothy 4:16. At my first defense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. May it not be held against them. But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed and all the Gentiles might hear it. And I was delivered from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil attack and will bring me safely to his kingdom. Do you believe that of us as well? So I'll ask you, what is your lion's den? What do you consider your lion's den? What are areas of your life where you find yourself surrounded by enemies who are either conspiring against you or lions that are just trying to destroy you, capable of devouring you? Or where the enemy, the devil, is constantly attacking you in your life? What are your lions? What are the things that you face and fear? Health, finances, family situations, work environment, living situations, relationship conflicts, addictions, worry, stress, anxiety, actual enemies. You have enemies. Do you believe, just as Paul did, that he said it, the Lord will rescue you from every evil attack and deliver you from the lion's mouth? I sure believe he will, if you trust in him, if we trust in him. Just as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego actually had to go through the fiery furnace, or Daniel just had to experience face-to-face and be in the lion's den, we often must experience being in it, facing those lions, being in the furnace in our lives as well. God doesn't always keep us out of that or prevent that or divert us from that, but he will rescue you in it, protect you in it, deliver you from it, and save you from it if you trust in him. That's having faith. That's having trust. Recognizing that he is your Savior and he will never fail. I think about David, and we're going to close with a psalm of David. David was in a tough situation because he was an Israelite, and the Israelites were told to kill him by King Saul. So he goes to the Philistines, and they were trying to kill him as well. And everywhere he turned, people are trying to kill him. So he hides out, and he writes this psalm in Psalm 34. We'll close with this. Just selected verses. I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. The lions may grow weak and hungry, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. God will save you. God will deliver you. God will protect you. God will prevail over your enemies if you trust in him. God is our Savior, and he will never fail. God bless you.